What is up, everybody? Dusty here, back with more Wrestling Empire. Now, if you're tuning in after the first Big Nasty video, you probably feel like you're missing out, and that's because you are.
He's going to be alright.
As my recording software decided to go into business for itself, as they say, so the first recording in my latest batch was just 30 minutes of a black screen and audio. See, in addition to Big Nasty's newly missing hand, Lance Monaco is also dead, and as you'd expect, there's some correlation between the two, although it probably didn't go down exactly as you imagine. To make a long story short, Big Nasty drove a motorcycle into Monaco's office, ran him over a bunch, then suplexed and otherwise threw Monaco onto said motorcycle until it exploded. Now, this all actually went off without a hitch, but as Big Nasty was stomping on what I can only now assume was Monaco's lifeless corpse, there was another wrestler spinning around in a wheelchair nearby, and he veered into Big Nasty's path, causing our hero's hand to explode in a flash of flesh, blood, and bone. Now, I don't remember exactly who was responsible, but I know for a fact it wasn't Jesse Bell or Jester, as the former had actually helped Big Nasty dispose of Monaco, while I distinctly remember that Jester was just hanging out minding his own business, and somehow I don't think I'm confusing him for somebody else, unless there's another wrestling clown running around that I'm unaware of. And speaking of another thing I don't remember, you may have noticed the partnership between Big Nasty and Doug Turner, and for the life of me, I couldn't tell you how this came to be.
Did we just become best friends? Yup!
Anyway, I do recall Big Nasty was brought to court and found guilty for the death of Lance Monaco, but his sentence was only like a $1,700 fine and month-long suspension, and honestly, with his guaranteed contract, it's more like a $1,700 fine and month of paid vacation. And this is where we jump back in. Now, you'd probably assume that losing one's hand would require a long period of recovery, but somehow Big Nasty wasn't actually feeling all that bad. And with Pyro, the new booker of All-American Wrestling, still holding him to Monaco's demands that he increase his skill, his current suspension seems like the perfect opportunity to focus on getting into the best shape possible. But Big Nasty would soon find his plans being derailed when he decides to be a good friend and aid Jester in his confrontation with Alpha Male, and the whole thing just evolves into a gym-wide melee that would come to a close rather unceremoniously for Big Nasty.
You got knocked the fuck out, man!
While I was initially fearing the worst, it turned out that the altercation only left Big Nasty with a minor neck injury, although the initial reports were a little overly optimistic about his recovery time. Now, there was some concern that due to his injury, Big Nasty would be unable to meet Pyro's deadline and would find himself being sent packing back to wrestling school, but luckily Pyro decides to hook him up with some cheap physical therapy, which would prove to be key in helping the Nasty One retain his job. Not long after this, Big Nasty is officially cleared to return, and wrestling fans are curious to see if he'd still be able to live up to his early potential, or if another promising young career would end up being cut short due to a mix of injuries, backstage politics, and poor judgment. And it seems as if there's at least one person who believes in Big Nasty, as in his first match back, Pyro would give him the opportunity to get a measure of revenge against Monaco's old stooge, Judgment Dave, in the form of a shot at his United States Championship. Before the show, it looks like Big Nasty might have this opportunity stolen from him when he's jumped by God of War.
There is no place to run! All the fuses and the exit signs have been burned out!
But thankfully, Jester once again just happens to be nearby, and due to Jester's timely intervention, Big Nasty has enough time to reasonably recover and decides to bring a pair of handcuffs to the ring for his match, which is perfectly legal according to Wrestling Empire. After all, a one-handed man might not usually be the favorite in a fight, but I bet his odds go up dramatically if you put him in there against somebody with both their hands tied behind their back. Now, the whole thing might have been a bit underwhelming for the fans in attendance, but for Big Nasty, dethroning Judgment Dave to claim his first ever championship was a moment he would savor for the rest of his life. Almost immediately after winning the title and receiving his payout, Big Nasty is asked if he could work another match, and considering that Pyro had just given him the biggest break of his career, Big Nasty was more than happy to help out with the show. However, things became a lot more complicated once he walked out the curtain and realized he'd be defending his freshly won title against his boy Doug. Now, to his credit, Big Nasty would resist the urge to utilize his handcuffs and decided to give Doug a fair fight. It was a highly competitive bout that ends with Big Nasty coming out on top, but the real story was after the match, when Doug decides to pay back Big Nasty's display of sportsmanship with a sucker punch like a sneaky little bitch boy. Backstage, the mood was far different as Doug began gaslighting Big Nasty and telling him how proud he is of his accomplishments, but any hopes of reconciliation between the two are dashed the following week when Big Nasty is involved in an accident backstage, and afterwards it's heavily implied that Doug was the mastermind behind it all.
You son of a bitch! Why?
Tell me why!
Predictably, this war of words broke down into a fight with fists, and although Big Nasty does what he can, Doug is able to capitalize on the fact that the Nasty One was still weakened from his accident. Now, this led Doug to be so confident that he literally decides to put his money where his mouth is before their next match, and seeing how every wrestler is just a glorified carny, Big Nasty hopped at the opportunity to separate a fool from his hard-earned money.
What about the carny code?
Despite being thoroughly outclassed this time, Doug just didn't know when to call it quits, and kept making threats while staring up at the lights, so Big Nasty decided it was best to take a little preemptive action and attempted to maim Doug with a chainsaw that somebody left outside the ring, although Doug somehow managed to escape relatively unscathed, with championship gold around his waist and $400 being deposited into his bank account every week, no matter what. Big Nasty had firmly established a comfortable position for himself within All-American Wrestling. So when he ended up accepting Fanny Monaco's offer to jump ship to Federation Online, it came as a shock to many. However, for those in the know, it didn't come as much of a surprise as many reports have come out that the pressure of booking All-American Wrestling has started wearing on Pyro, to the point that he had even started challenging his wrestlers to fights backstage, and considering how his last clash with the front office had ended, Big Nasty decided it was probably just best to move on. And it initially appears like Federation Online has big plans for Big Nasty, as he's instantly put into a feud with one of their top stars, but apparently Fanny began to suffer from some quick buyer's remorse as she starts getting on Big Nasty's case about his lack of skill and canceling his bookings at the last second, which is something Big Nasty actually has to care about now that he no longer has a downside guarantee. And one of his fellow wrestlers, Rory Awesome, seems to sense his worries and determines it's now the perfect time to introduce Big Nasty to some radical new ideas.
Class antagonisms, feudal something of oppression.
While the ideological implications might fly over our hero's head, the one thing that's clear is that Awesome's call to unionize would piss off Miss Monaco, and that's something that Big Nasty can get behind. Now, evidently, it didn't take long for word to get back to Fanny as she tracks Big Nasty down and demands he gives up the union's leader, and when Big Nasty refuses, she doesn't take it too well.
I'll kill you, Come here!
Of course, shortly after this, her mood would dramatically shift, and she was doing her best to convince Big Nasty he should get on the juice, proving without any doubt that she truly is her father's daughter. And when you add in all the painkillers that he was abusing on the side, I think it's safe to say that Big Nasty had truly earned the right to call himself a professional wrestler.
Let's just say that fame was like a drug, but what was even more like a drug was the drugs.
It wasn't all high times and good vibes though, as during one of his drug runs, Big Nasty would be involved in another wheelchair incident, and while it wasn't nearly as serious as the first, it did play a pretty big part in him having a different kind of accident.
Baby made a boom boom.
Oh, good heavens!
Also, in the aftermath of the roster's successful unionization, Fanny would hold Big Nasty responsible and took him to court to have him removed from Federation Online. Now, this seems like the sort of thing that his new union would intervene in, but now that they've all got cushy new contracts, they were seemingly content to have Big Nasty take the fall.
Thank you for not snitching! You stupid motherfucker!
Now, having pooped his pants and lost his job, Big Nasty finally reaches his breaking point after Ripper Ace decides to rub some extra salt in the wound and suffers a bit of a mental breakdown in the courtroom. Back at wrestling school, Big Nasty finds himself in a 6-way elimination match, and the few fans who are in attendance are thrilled to see that while the current state of his mental health might be questionable, rumors of his in-ring decline had been greatly exaggerated. However, as Big Nasty was eager to create a buzz and get back to one of the major promotions, he decided to introduce stairs into the mix, and while the fans were initially excited to see some hardcore antics, their exhilaration would abruptly change to horror when Big Nasty delivered a German suplex onto the broken stairs and completely severed what had to that point remained of his left arm in the process. Mercifully, Alligator would crawl over and make the cover instead of subjecting him to further punishment. However, once he finally managed to make his way back behind the curtain, the news was even worse than he feared, as in addition to the obvious external damage, there was a large concern that Big Nasty may have been permanently paralyzed and could be forced to walk away from professional wrestling altogether. Hey again everybody, Dusty here, and I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you didn't, then I have no clue why you'd still be hanging around at this point, but whatever, you do you. However, if you did enjoy it, then why not leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel? That way you can be kept up to date with all my latest content. Or don't let me tell you how to live your life. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching, I'm out.